Modern life hides a dangerous truth. We like to believe our homes are safe havens against the cold, walls sealed tight, thermostats humming, heaters pushing back the winter. But when the power dies in the middle of a deep freeze, all that comfort collapses. The temperature inside a modern house plummets in hours. Pipes burst, families bundle together in panic. Everything we depend on fails fast. Yet centuries ago, ordinary peasants lived through winters far harsher than most of us will ever face. Their nights sank to brutal temperatures, the kind that would turn a modern home into an icebox. But for them, this wasn't a crisis. It wasn't even unusual. These people didn't merely endure the cold, they understood it in a way we've forgotten. With nothing but the land around them, they built systems that kept their families alive year after year. What we see as primitive was, in truth, a masterpiece of practical resilience. We picture the medieval peasant as ragged, hungry, and endlessly cold. But that picture is incomplete. Their lives were hard, yes, but they were experts in the physics of survival. They read the seasons like a book. They understood materials with the precision of engineers. Every winter, they put knowledge, not technology, between themselves and death. They didn't wait for outside help. They were the help. Their first challenge each winter was food. Once the harvest season ended, nature shut down. Fields slept under frost. Plants died back to roots. Animals grew lean. There was no grocery store, no pantry full of packaged goods, no refrigerator that kept things fresh with the flip of a switch. If they didn't preserve enough food before the cold arrived, they wouldn't live to see spring. So they created a winter pantry built on simple but powerful principles. At the center was drying. They knew that the tiny organisms responsible for rot could not grow without moisture. Remove the water, and food lasted. They sliced apples, pears, root vegetables, even thin strips of meat, and hung them high above the hearth. Rising heat from the fire drifted upward all day, slowly pulling moisture out. It was a quiet, reliable process. Modern research shows that properly dried foods can keep most of their nutrients. In some cases, they even become more nutritious. A sun-dried tomato holds more concentrated lycopene than a fresh one. Medieval people didn't know the chemistry, but they understood the results. Food that stayed good for months and strengthened them in the cold. Salting came next. Salt was precious, but it saved lives. Meat packed tightly in layers of salt or soaked in strong brine lasted through the darkest months. Salt drew moisture out through osmosis, making the environment too dry for spoilage. Norse sailors learned that 20–25% salt by weight protected meat during long voyages, exactly what modern experts still recommend. One pig, salted well, could feed a family for a full season. They also relied on fermentation, though they didn't use that word. They only knew it worked. Shredded cabbage mixed with salt turned its own juices into a protective brine. Beneath that brine, helpful bacteria converted sugars into lactic acid, lowering the pH until nearly all harmful microbes died off. The result? Sauerkraut. Not only preserved, but full of living cultures that strengthened immunity. Korean kimchi follows the same rule, and studies today confirm that these foods sharpen the body's defenses during winter. But drying and salting weren't enough. Families also needed fresh food deep into winter. Their solution was a root cellar, an underground room dug below the frost line, where temperatures stayed steady around 32,040 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, potatoes, beets, carrots, and turnips were stored in layers of sand. The sand was more than a cushion, it kept vegetables from touching each other. One rotten potato releasing ethylene gas could spoil an entire pile. Medieval families didn't know the chemical name, but they knew the danger. Everything in their storage system had purpose. Nothing was random. They calculated, season after season, how much food a family needed. A household of 5 required around 3,000 calories a day. Over a 4-month winter, that meant more than 360,000 calories. They prioritized high-calorie foods first, rendered fat, nuts, dried meats. A single pound of tallow held around 4,000 calories. A pound of dried apples, only about a quarter of that. Their survival depended on choosing wisely. Meat, once cooked, wasn't simply left to chance. It was packed into clay crocks, then sealed under a thick layer of melted fat. When the fat hardened, it formed an airtight shield. No oxygen meant no spoilage. This method, later called confit, could keep meat safe for half a year. These techniques worked separate tricks. They formed a network, each method supporting the next. Drying stretched their harvest. Salting protected precious meat. Fermentation added nutrition. Root cellars kept vegetables fresh. Fat sealing preserved cooked meals. Together, they created a pantry that carried entire families through the frozen months. While storms raged outside, there was still food on the table. That alone was a victory of both intelligence and discipline. But food was only the first battle. Cold came next. Their homes were drafty. Their resources were limited. Yet they solved winter with the same blend of observation and ingenuity. They knew the human body itself was a small heater. One adult gives off about 100 watts of warmth. Multiply that by several people sleeping close together under thick wool blankets, and the heat becomes significant. Medieval families slept communally on purpose, not because they lacked space, but because warmth meant survival. Modern testing shows that when 4 people sleep in a cold room under wool blankets, they maintain a comfortable pocket of warmth around 65,068 degrees F. Alone, a person loses far more heat and struggles to stay warm. But peasants didn't stop there. In many longhouses, livestock shared the same roof in winter, separated by wooden partitions. A cow produces the same heat as a constant electric heater. Sheep add more. Their body heat rose through the building, warming the living area by several degrees. In a world without thermostats, that difference meant life. Sleeping platforms were built high off the ground because cold air sinks. Beneath the bed, insulation was created from straw, light, dry, filled with hollow stalks that trapped air. That straw mattress wasn't primitive at all. 6 inches of it could match the insulation value of modern fiberglass. Nothing in a peasant home was accidental. Every choice, from where they slept to how they stored food, was part of an interlocking system shaped by centuries of experience. And for them, winter wasn't a surprise. It was a test they prepared for all year long. For modern people, the house is a sealed box, something meant to keep the world out. But medieval peasants didn't think that way. Their homes were not airtight fortresses. They were living organisms, shaped by wind, smoke, fire, earth, and the rhythm of the seasons. Today we mock their cottages as crude or barely livable, but that judgment reveals more about our ignorance than their limitations. Every beam, every layer of clay, every handful of straw was placed with intention, and the result was a structure that excelled at one thing above all: surviving the cold when it mattered most. Their homes weren't designed for comfort. They were designed for endurance, and in that purpose, they succeeded in ways our insulated, fragile houses often fail. The backbone of their walls was wattle and daub, a method so simple on the surface that modern people overlook its brilliance. Branches were woven tightly between posts, forming a kind of natural lattice. Over this, peasants pressed a thick mixture of clay, straw, and sometimes animal dung. When it dried, it became a dense, semi-flexible barrier that resisted wind, repelled rain, and, most importantly, retained heat. Modern thermal tests have shown that a well-made wattle and daub wall has an insulation value comparable to contemporary wood frame construction. And unlike modern materials, it could absorb heat during the day and release it slowly through the night. This thermal mass effect helped keep indoor temperature stable during long, cold spells. What we dismiss as primitive was a fine-tuned heating system created from the simplest parts of the landscape. The roofs were steep and heavily thatched, made from densely layered reeds or straw. Thatched roofs are often romanticized today, but few realize their engineering power. When thatch is packed thick enough, it becomes waterproof, wind-resistant, and superbly insulating. A well-built thatched roof traps enormous pockets of air, nature's best insulation. In winter, this kept warm air from escaping upward. In summer, it kept heat from pouring in. Tests show that a 12-inch layer of thatch can match or exceed the insulation of many modern roofing materials. Peasants didn't need laboratory data. They knew from experience that even during nights when frost turned the world silver, the space beneath their roof stayed temperate. Heat always rises, so medieval families used their architecture to trap it. Lofts were built directly under the roof, accessed by ladders rather than stairs. These lofts served as sleeping spaces for the family. They weren't elevated for convenience. They were elevated because height meant warmth. The fire on the main floor sent heat upward, and the loft captured it like a bowl. While the ground floor might sink to the low 40s or 50s, the loft could reach the 60s purely from radiant heat and body warmth. This is the reason families slept close together, not because they lacked beds, but because shared heat amplified this advantage. A medieval family sleeping in a loft under a thatched roof had a more stable nighttime temperature than many modern families during a power outage. The hearth, always placed in the home's center, wasn't just for cooking. It was the heart of the entire microclimate. The fire burned low and steady throughout the day, not blazing, but smoldering, providing continuous warmth without wasting fuel. Wood was scarce, so peasants mastered efficient burning. They used slow-burning hardwoods like oak when they could, but more often they turned to peat, blocks of partially decomposed vegetation cut from the earth and dried. Peat burns slowly and evenly, producing long-lasting heat with minimal smoke. It essentially functioned like a primitive space heater. With a carefully tended fire, the cottage maintained a stable warmth that prevented indoor frost, even during brutal cold spells. Modern homes lose heat rapidly because they rely on a single heating system. Medieval homes used the entire structure as a thermal battery. And then there was the floor. You'd expect a dirt floor to be cold, but peasants understood the ground better than that. They insulated it with deep layers of straw, packed down over time until it formed a thick, cushiony mat. Straw is filled with hollow, air-filled stems, making it one of the best natural insulators. A 12-inch straw floor could hold surprising warmth and stay dry if properly maintained. This is why medieval homes didn't feel like icy caves. The ground itself became a stable platform of insulation. In some regions, peasants even laid flat stones under the straw to capture heat from the fire and radiate it slowly, an early form of passive heating long before engineers coined the term. The most underestimated winter advantage came from the animals. Cows, goats, pigs, and sheep were not kept outdoors. They shared the same building, usually separated by simple partitions. A single cow produces as much heat as a constant electric heater. A few sheep add even more. Their body heat didn't just warm the animal's own stalls. It rose upward, contributing several degrees of warmth to the living area above. The combined effect was remarkable, even when outside temperatures dropped far below freezing. The interior rarely matched those extremes. The animals acted like biological radiators, turning the home into a living ecosystem of shared warmth. We consider this unsanitary. They considered it survival, and in the context of winter, they were right. All these elements, wattle and daub walls, thatched roofs, straw floors, loft sleeping, animal heat, and controlled fires, formed a system that transformed winter from an enemy into a manageable force. The home didn't fight the cold. It worked with physics, trapping heat where it rose, storing warmth in the walls, feeding it upward from both fire and livestock. Every part of the house participated in survival. And because these elements were simple, they were repairable. A damaged wall could be patched with clay in minutes. A leaking roof could be rethatched with fresh bundles. Well, the home was not a fragile machine. It was a flexible structure built to endure centuries. This is why medieval peasants didn't freeze the moment the temperature dropped. Their survival wasn't luck or desperation. It was a mastery of natural materials that modern society has completely forgotten. We rely on technology. They relied on understanding. We trust in systems. They trusted in knowledge. And when winter arrived with its long, merciless nights, it was that knowledge, not electricity, that kept them alive. There is a moment in every medieval winter when the fire begins to fade. The embers glow, the light dims, and the night presses in with a cold that feels almost alive. The modern mind panics at that idea. Losing heat means losing safety. But the medieval peasant saw opportunity. If fire was the heart of the home, then stone was its memory. And so begins one of the most ingenious survival systems ever created, a method not only to generate heat, but to store it, carry it, and release it slowly through the night. This was the birth of the portable radiator. They understood something we forget. Flames burn fast, but heat lives inside mass. Throughout the evening, peasants placed dense stones directly inside the embers, not random rocks, but carefully chosen materials. Soapstone, with its extremely high heat capacity, was the gold standard. Granite, abundant and durable, served almost as well. Sandstone was avoided. It cracked violently under high heat. After hours buried in glowing coals, reaching nearly 1,000 degrees, these stones became thermal batteries. A 10-pound soapstone could hold over 3,000 BTUs, enough to outlast an entire winter night. And when the house darkened and the coals settled, these stones were pulled from the fire with iron tongs, wrapped in thick wool, and carried to bed. Some families tucked them at their feet. Others pressed them between sleepers, turning a cold straw mattress into a radiant sanctuary. Wrapped correctly, those stones held a steady warmth of over 100 degrees for 6 to 8 hours. This was elegant engineering, converting violent fire into slow, stable heat. A technology so effective that during the 2021 Texas blackout, families who rediscovered this ancient method slept comfortably while their neighbors shivered. The peasant didn't fight the cold. He outsmarted it. But fire management didn't end with heat storage. The far greater challenge was preserving fire itself. In winter, starting a flame with numb hands and stone tools could take 15 agonizing minutes. Losing the fire meant losing the home's heartbeat. So peasants learned to keep flame alive even when it looked dead, a technique called ash banking. Before sleeping, they raked the remaining coals into a compact mound and buried it under 2 to 3 inches of hardwood ash. The physics behind this method are astonishingly precise. Ash has low thermal conductivity, meaning it traps heat. Its fine particles limit oxygen flow, slowing combustion to a crawl. Beneath this blanket, coals smoldered at 400 to 500 degrees all night long. In the morning, with a few brush strokes of a hand broom and a breath of air, the fire roared back to life. No flint, no steel, no wasted effort. Modern tests show properly banked coals can survive 24 to 36 hours. Colonial Williamsburg recorded a fire revived after 31 hours. For the medieval peasant, this wasn't a trick, it was routine. Lose the flame, and you lose time, energy, and warmth. Keep it alive, and you gain mastery over winter itself. Of course, surviving winter wasn't just about heat. It was about protecting the body like a fortress. And nothing exemplifies medieval engineering better than the winter wardrobe. Modern outdoor gear companies advertise moisture-wicking fabrics, thermal retention, and layered insulation, but the peasant invented every principle centuries earlier. The first layer was always linen. It wicked sweat away from the skin with surprising efficiency, a lesson burned into their culture after generations of frostbite and hyperthermia. Wool came next, the miracle fiber of the pre-industrial world. Its crimped structure trapped millions of tiny air pockets, creating a buffer of dead air, one of nature's best insulators. Layer over layer, wool tunic over tunic, wool hose, wool hood, wool hold, wool cloak, thick with retained lanolin. The lanolin wasn't a byproduct, it was an asset, hydrophobic, wind-resistant, naturally insulating. A properly full cloak could shed snow and rain for hours. Tests at the University of York found that period-accurate medieval clothing kept subjects warm at 4 degrees Fahrenheit during strenuous labor for 4 straight hours. Their core temperatures remained perfectly stable. Their extremities stayed functional. This wasn't primitive clothing, it was a wearable survival system crafted by experience, not technology. Even the environment became a tool. Where modern homeowners panic at the sight of snow piled against their walls, medieval peasants saw insulation. In Scandinavia, the Alps and the Russian steppe, snow was deliberately banked against the north-facing walls of longhouses, 2 or 3 feet deep, carefully compacted, angled to shed meltwater. Snow is 95% trapped air, and air is insulation. 2 feet of compacted snow produced an R value near 20, nearly identical to modern fiberglass insulation. Thermal imaging of reconstructed 14th century dwellings shows heat loss dropping by almost half when walls were snowbanked. This wasn't folklore, it was science built through observation. Snow became armor. We have to do this every day. It's very simple to do what? Heat and insulation were only part of the system. The body itself needed fuel, and medieval peasants engineered their diet with the precision of athletes. In winter, fat wasn't an enemy, it was life. Modern dietary advice collapses in pre-industrial conditions. A 20% fat diet would have been lethal. Fat provides more than double the calories of carbohydrates, and in a world where energy needs soared past 3,500 calories per day, caloric density was everything. But more importantly, metabolizing fat creates internal heat, activating brown adipose tissue, the body's built-in furnace. Modern research shows high-fat diets and cold conditions increase brown fat activity by up to 45%. Medieval peasants discovered this effect long before it had a name. Bread fried in lard for breakfast, fatty pork at midday, butter-rich porridge at night, fuel calibrated to environment, not indulgence, survival. And then there was tallow, the unsung hero of winter resilience. Rendered animal fat became candle fuel, leather waterproofing, cooking medium, medicinal balm, and even a primitive skincare technology that rivaled modern barrier creams. Rubbed into boots, it repelled water. Rubbed into wool, it strengthened weather resistance. Rubbed onto skin, it formed a protective layer nearly identical to human sebum. Comitic acid, stearic acid, oleic acid, these compounds built an invisible shield against windburn and frostbite. Even soap, harsh as it was, came from the saponification of tallow and wood ash. One substance solving 7 problems. That was medieval efficiency. But perhaps the most misunderstood survival method of all was the grease layer, the decision not to bathe in winter. To the medieval peasant, it was physics. Soap strips the skin of natural oils that form a hydrophobic insulating barrier. Remove it in winter, and heat loss skyrockets. A 2009 Army study found untreated skin lost 29% more heat in cold humidity than skin coated with a protective fatty layer. In winter, peasants kept those oils intact, not laziness, strategy. Each of these practices wasn't isolated. They were pieces of a unified system, a winter survival machine built from observation, necessity, and deep understanding of nature's rules. Stone, fire, fabric, fat, snow, diet, skin, everything worked together as a closed-loop design. Nothing wasted, nothing random, everything optimized. Today, we tend to rely on fragile systems, electrical grids, gas lines, supply chains. But the medieval peasant lived in a world where systems existed inside the home, within the body, and in the land around them. Their winter wasn't easy, but it was survivable, because they knew how to turn nature into an ally. And if the modern world ever slipped, if the power went out, the stores emptied, the heat failed, it would be their forgotten knowledge, not our technology, that would keep us alive. Winter exposes the truth about our world, not the world we imagine we live in, the world we actually live in. A world where every comfort we depend on, heat, food, light, water, exists only because massive systems are working flawlessly in the background. Systems so fragile that a single storm, a frozen transformer, or a failed substation can bring them down in minutes. And when they fall, most modern people discover something shocking. Their home is not a shelter. It's a box that only works when the grid does. But medieval peasants lived through winters far harsher than ours without fear. And the reason is simple. Their survival system was built into their lives, not into infrastructure. They didn't outsource resilience. They practiced it. They lived it. Their homes, their clothing, their food systems, their heating strategies, everything was designed with failure in mind. And that is the lesson we're meant to learn. Because the message in their knowledge isn't go live in a hut and churn butter. The message is design your life so you are not helpless. We live in a world where we've traded resilience for convenience, where we assume warmth will always come from a thermostat, food will always come from a truck, and light will always come from a switch. But the medieval peasant understood something deeper, something we've forgotten. Nature is not the enemy. It's the environment you must learn to operate in. Every skill they used, from drying food to communal heating, from ash-banked embers to snow-bank insulation, wasn't old-fashioned. It was engineering, practical science. Thousands of years of trial, error, refinement, and generational memory woven into daily life. And here's the hard truth. Our ancestors didn't survive winter because they were tougher. They survived because they were prepared. Today, preparedness doesn't have to mean living like it's the 1400s. It means knowing how to function when systems fail. It means building redundancy. It means understanding your materials, your environment, and your body. It means learning the small, powerful skills that turn panic into confidence. Because in the end, the true value of medieval knowledge isn't nostalgia, it's freedom. Freedom from the fear of outages. Freedom from the fragility of modern systems.
Freedom from the belief that survival is something you need technology to achieve. So, as we close this exploration of forgotten winter mastery, ask yourself one question.
If the power went out tonight, would you trust your systems more than your skills?
If this knowledge has opened your eyes, subscribe. We're just beginning to uncover the ancient systems that can make you more resilient, more capable, and more independent, no matter where you live or what the world throws at you. Because our ancestors didn't just endure winter, they built systems that made survival predictable. They left us a blueprint, and it's time we start using it.
Thank you for watching. Stay prepared, stay resilient, and I'll see you in the next episode.